something. We're growing in momentum because we're seeing all the protesters around the world saying something. And we know that what we get to do every week in this format is to bring others to your attention who I would say are doing something. So in our segment this week, we are focusing on the impact of COVID on Filipino workers, essential workers. They have given their hearts and love to the healing and nurturing process. And they've given so much that we know that it is important for you to hear what that means and what's the effect of giving. And in return, we receive so much. So I'm opening up today's segment with an open heart, and I want to turn it over to my sister colleagues. And once again, this is Renee from LA.
Hi, everyone. This is Gabbie from Houston, Texas. Welcome, and thank you for joining us today.
Hello, everyone. This is Melissa joining you from Central Florida. Welcome.
And hi, everyone. I'm Annalisa, also from right outside of LA, close enough to LA. This is a great afternoon for me. I think we've been talking a lot about social justice, and our two guests today are women that I know very well through my social justice life. Both Jollene and Doris I've worked with for so long on so many important issues, who we've invited to talk about the 12 million Filipino workers that are throughout the world. Jollene is, I want to start with you, since you're also in LA, and is the founding chairperson of AF3IRM. And Jollene, can you just tell us a little bit about what AF3IRM is and what you guys are doing?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. So AF3IRM is a national organization of women of color. We have 10 chapters across the US, including Puerto Rico, territory, colony, as well as Hawaii. And we have 3 campaign areas: one against militarism, including the police occupation of our communities; one for immigrant women's rights; and the last one is against trafficking of women and children.
Great, thanks, Jollene. And we also have with us Doris Mendoza, who is a writer, an activist, and a Zen practitioner. She, along with a collective of writers, has written an open letter to the world, Doris. And you know, I'm gonna invite her to actually start with that letter.
Thanks, Annalisa. Yes, it's an open letter, and it was written by a writers collective. It took a couple of months to do, and we can talk more about that. So here it is. An open letter to all peoples of Philippine ancestry in the homeland and around the world regarding the COVID-19 pandemic and global uncertainty, from fellow persons of Philippine descent. Dear ones, there's so much to say. Shall we begin with, I hope this letter finds you well? And shall we follow up with proud, inspired, in awe? Then with, you are one determined, resourceful, creative, fierce group of people, and we are humbled to be one of you. There are 12 million of us living and working outside of the Philippines, spread out in over 100 countries. Among us are nurses that make up 20% of nurses in California and New York. There are also the doctors, physical therapists, hospital administrators, and healthcare workers in non-hospital settings. There's an estimated 40,000 Philippine workers in the UK's national health system, including 18,500 nurses. There are Philippine nurses in the Gulf states, in Japan, and so on. Spain is fast-tracking entries of nurses from the Philippines. In addition to these frontline workers, the essential workers among us are postal workers, workers in airports and grocery stores, social workers, domestic workers. In the US, domestic workers are deemed essential, but are not part of the coronavirus relief bill. We also have the overseas contractual workers who were stranded in their host countries or in cargo ships and cruises. Philippine seafarers who make up nearly a quarter of the world's merchant marine crews, were stuck in ships for months. Meanwhile, in the Philippines, the premier supplier of nurses to the rest of the world, the ratio of care is 1 nurse to 40 to 60 patients. The pandemic has also been used to quell protests. In one indigenous people's barricade in Nueva Vizcaya, the group's leader was arrested for allegedly violating quarantine rules. This particular protest is against environmental degradation and displacement by the mining corporation Oceana Gold. And this can go on. There is so much to say. And we haven't even mentioned the alarmingly disproportionate COVID-19 cases and death rates among Philippine frontline and essential workers around the world. We haven't even explored the situation of Philippine women caught in the global sex trade and the spike in child pornography and child sexual abuse and domestic violence. We pause here, we breathe, and now give voice to the small and big ways we've sustained and continue to sustain one another. We've mobilized for the frontliners and essential workers. There's been cooking kare-kare and pinakbet for them, doing their laundry, household chores, errands. There's been online tributes, memorial pages, donations for funeral and family expenses. We rallied for PPEs, wrote petitions to hospital administrators, sent stories to the media. Indeed, among us are activists, union organizers, advocates, cooks, artists, writers, mothers, fathers, sisters, and brothers who, while in quarantine, found creative ways to step up and look out for one another. The experts say this COVID-19 pandemic won't be over anytime soon and that there may be waves of it. Let's make sure we're well equipped, that the frontline workers are well equipped, physically, mentally, and spiritually. Let's continue to demand essential protection equipment and support. We cannot let up on that because while they are lauded as heroes, it seemed that sometimes the reality on the ground made them look like collateral damage. Let's continue to strengthen the activism and advocacy for those among us caught in dire situations. The indigenous peoples in the Philippines will continue to guard and protect the land, pandemic or no pandemic. Let's support them. We now find ourselves in the midst of a heightened struggle for racial justice. In the US and around the world, we are not bystanders. The movement for Black lives is intertwined with our condition as people of Philippine ancestry. For one, Philippine workers abroad often experience racism in the workplace. Not treated as equals in their host countries, most often treated as automatons that provide service. They are often underpaid and targets of employment scams. Also, there is our history of Spanish colonization and US occupation. Race played a part in these. Of course, people of Philippine ancestry are diverse. We're not all fond of the same things. We don't all love karaoke and line dancing. We don't all crave for dinuguan and orbagoong. And some of us are more familiar with uncertainty than others. Indeed, some of us, for generations, have only known and lived with uncertainty. But we are of the same roots, roots that go deeper than the differences in our traditions, in our religions, in our many languages, in our skin tone, roots that trace back to multiple migrations into the archipelago later to be called Pilipinas, roots enriched by those who stood and standing firm against colonizers and modern day colonialism, roots that cover the globe in our various paths of immigration as if adding islands to the archipelago. May we draw strength from all of this. And this time, it's not bahala na or come what may. This time, it's we will make it so with deepest respect and gratitude.
Wow.
Powerful, powerful, very beautiful. I have to ask the question, where did you send that letter?
Well, we're planning to put it up on a website and actually invite others to sign on to it, pass it on, and we will have appended to that open letter are resources for community and for action, one of which Jollene will be talking about later. And everyone's invited to kind of add their own thoughts, you know, since immigration is a long part of our life. We know about sending letters to each other before the internet. I used to send letters to my mother, or she sends us balikbayan boxes. This is like, you know, sending each other that letter, sending each other photos. And it's a way to kind of, it's a place to kind of go back to again and again, to find community, to find refuge, to find strength. So it will be posted and it will be shared in social media. And we will start doing that today. Today is the Philippine Independence Day, so it's a good day to start it. And thanks for the question, Renee.
Thanks, Doris. You know, you mentioned all of the different ways that we've been able to sustain ourselves. And Jollene, if you want to share one of the really most beautiful things that I've seen during this time, a digital tribute that AF3IRM has created. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and put it up. If you could just kind of tell us some of the background around it.
Right, thank you. And thank you, Doris and the collective, for that beautiful letter. Kanlungan was born from, I think it's collective grief, really, and a sense of also collective anger. About 4.5 weeks ago, I called up another one of the 6 people that worked on this website, Ninochka Rosca, and I was upset because 2 of my aunts passed away from COVID while they were treating patients. They contracted it as registered nurses and they did not survive the virus. And one was named during week 10 of the pandemic, finally, by Los Angeles. And my other aunt, Nilda, has still not been named. And I came to this realization that while other nurses, like for example, Celia Marcos, who passed away from COVID after complaining that she didn't have proper PPE at Hollywood Presbyterian Hospital here in Los Angeles, we didn't have the data in one place. So I was thinking about it as an organizer. And I said, we need a place where journalists and writers and organizers can say, like, these are the people that have been impacted by this virus. These are the people caring for patients. And these are the people who have already raised the alarm and people aren't listening. Is it because they're brown? Is it because they're women? Is it because they're immigrants? Is it because they're workers and the hospitals need to still turn a profit? I'm not sure, but those are their faces. The first, Rosary, is my aunt. She passed away. She leaves behind 3 daughters and a twin sister who's also still currently taking care of patients as an RN. And Ninochka said, we also have to make sure we humanize them. I never even thought about that. And the reason why I never thought about that is because my entire family are nurses. I'm the only one that's not a nurse or working in a hospital as like a social worker. They've always been people to me. And that really impacted me because I realized that when a hospital CEO decides that they're gonna cut some corners, they're not thinking about my mom or my sister-in-law or my best friend. They're thinking about the profit. So this was born out of collective grief and rage and a need for us to be able to name our own dead because no governments have been doing that for us. And we took extra care to choose all the photos. We were very particular about the data, could talk about that, because we also want them to rest with dignity. And hopefully their stories will prevent others from passing away because their employers or the host countries that they're working in refuse to prioritize their lives.
Wow, what a tribute. Each one of the pictures, each one of the names, thank you so much for sharing it with us. How do you, I'm thinking of our Guyanese population, and we have like a Facebook page, and that is so beautiful. What you've put together is so beautiful. When you're looking at the pictures, I feel the stories. I hear your voice. Tell me about how did you compile it? Like, is it in a specific order? Is it just the information came in?
So it was as the information came in. I mean, we're all volunteer. There are 6 of us. I named the Nochka Rosca. There was also Iris Boncales Strauss, who hand painted all the artwork on there. She was so moved by the idea of the website that she just basically stayed up for 3 days in a row and painted all the artwork. She's also a firm. Charisse Yanit Nadal, who is an educator, also joined in, and her research is reflected in the reason why they came. And then we have Grace Regulano, who's actually the research and analytics director at United Teachers Los Angeles, the union that I also work for. And that live map where you could see by country how many deaths took place, as well as if you click on every single medical cross, you could see the name and the location and the photo and actually the source, like articles and GoFundMes for every single fallen worker. That's actually Grace's work. And we basically just worked before our paid work began and stayed up at night, put it together. So this is about 4.5 weeks of 6 people's dedication to the fallen healthcare workers. We also had Charlene Sayo from Canada. She focused on Canada, where a lot of caregivers, especially long-term caregivers and mental health workers, had passed. So yeah, we only added a name if we had 2 sources for that name. So I'm holding on to about several names where I click on the article, I can see that they're a fallen Filipino healthcare worker, but because we want to also protect the sanctity of the data so that academics and researchers and journalists can use it, I'm holding on to that. And we basically check every day. Just yesterday, I added four new names.
Wow. Each detail is just so, wow, thank you.
And it seems like it's daily work, having to check every name. And especially during this time where there's so much, I like what you mentioned, collective grief. And it's so hard to cope with this grief because there's so many different restrictions right now, right? Like usually how my family copes with grief is we all come together at one's living room and they pray the rosary, the novena, and they bring all the food. But we can't do that right now. And so what are ways that that you found yourself having to cope with all of this, especially seeing the data every day? I can imagine how disheartening that can be.
How I've coped? I've had multiple breakdowns, just being honest. That's like a non-clinical term.
Yes.
But there have been, especially during the photo collection, there were 3 of us that worked on the photo collection, and it was combing the internet, trying to find people's Facebook. And that process when you're preparing the dead for their funeral and you want to choose the best photo for your loved one. I remember when my grandmother died, I was like, I know she would like this picture of herself. I know it because she actually has a framed copy in her home. Like, that's the photo I need. And so we were going through this process. And at the time, there were about 160 photos, 160 workers that we were trying to memorialize. And we were just calling each other. It was a Saturday. It was a weekend. And I remember Iris saying, like, I keep breaking down and crying. And I was like, me too. I don't know. We have to finish this, but let's take turns. So I think there's also something to say about women's labor in this realm, right? Like when I was listening to Doris's letter, I can just imagine, I was feeling emotional hearing her read it out loud. I can't imagine the process of writing it. And I think that's similar to our experience with a website.
Going back to the letter, you know, one of the reasons, as Doris mentioned earlier, that this has kind of been months in the works, is because I know that, Doris, you've spoke to so many Filipino workers to get their stories, you know, in order to represent it well in your letter. What was that process like, and what were you taking from that? Yeah, from their stories.
Well, I think I mentioned this open letter to you, Annalisa, like, I don't know, 4 months ago. And because there were so many stories, so many people just saying, you know, what they're doing, what hurt, what pain, all of it. You know, and then my sister got COVID. I didn't know what to do. And then somebody from Bellevue wanted us to contact the health and hospitals in New York. There was, you know, like, I don't know how people were saying they're not busy and they're finding time to learn the guitar. I don't know about you guys, but it has been quite busy. And plus we were in this writers collective that we're in. A couple of the women are in the Philippines. So we're also getting some stories from over there. And I don't know if you guys know, but the president there is now using this whole thing to really suppress the activists and all kinds of organizing there. And a couple of weeks ago, actually, there's been 2 community organizers killed. So in composing this letter, a whole bunch of us just kind of researched what was going on, the data, etc. But then we wanted to at first focus on the essential workers and the frontliners here in the US. But then you hear these other things, you know, the seafarers stuck for 2 months on a ship, and they're in bunkers, right? So there's no social distancing. And you hear about, you know, domestic workers in Saudi Arabia, you know, that their employers don't want them coming into work. Where do they go? They're not, you know. So we just wanted to kind of put all of that in this one letter. That's why we started it with "there's so much to say," because there is really so much to say. And like Jollene, writing this 3-page or 2-page letter came from maybe, I don't know, 45, 50 pages of a draft. And reading all of it, reading all the articles, reading all the stories, hearing all the stories and interviews, it's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking. But then you see too, you witness how people get together and kind of, they even find humor in all of it. Mm-hmm. You know, I mean, Filipino humor is like, you know how it is. I mean, to some people, they would cringe hearing it, but it's a way. We're used to coping as a people. We're used to adapting. That's why in the last part of that letter, we want to say no more of bahala na or come what may. It's we will make it so. Yeah, so it's been a heartbreaking, but then awe-inspiring process.
For both Jollene and Doris, I'm wondering, given the work you've done, Doris, the letter, Jollene, the tribute, what did you discover about yourself?
Jollene, you go first. Young ones first.
All All right, that's fine. I already talked about my breakdown. So I initially wanted to do this because I was thinking about the need for data and to honor my aunts. But like you can't get away from your organizer and activist roots. It's like planning a memorial or a viewing, but having an organizer lens on it, which was weird. It was weird. We've been to so many protests talking about, for example, missing murdered Indigenous women, or how many killings in the Philippines of organizers have taken place where we're standing in front of a consulate, like especially in the last, like, say, like the early 2000s, right? But it's like, no matter how far you think you can get away from this, everything is political. Even our mourning is political. So I do want to talk a little bit about targets later on, but that was a new experience for me. I've had the privilege of not having to bury comrades because they have been taken from us in a way that was unexpected, right? I think activists are used to putting their bodies on the line. We've had AF3IRM women hit by rubber bullets just in the last, like, 2 weeks. But these people weren't set out to be heroes. They didn't want to be heroes. They just want to put food on the table, take care of their patients. But even in that, my grief had also become politicized. And I'm still sitting with that, to be honest. It's new for me. It's new for me. So that's.
Doris.
Oh, yes. Okay, what did I discover about myself during this process? Renee, how dare you ask that question? But really, it's rediscovery, actually, rediscovery. That I love the Philippines. I love my people. I love my people. That's it. Like, all the writings that I do, these are like love letters to the Philippines.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, wow. I'm telling you, it's been a gift to hear your stories and sharing in your collective grief. I never know where I'm gonna land at the end of our segment, and I just feel such a soul-to-soul connection as I've heard Jollene. It's not just your work, Doris. It's not just your work. It is a deep soul connection that connects to your spirit and who you are, and just feeling the importance and the reminders. You all are holding space for the ancestors, and it is so powerful, and just reminding us not to forget, not to forget. So it just, you know, my heart is open with so much gratitude, because you are my sisters. You are my sisters. You know, on behalf of the team, the crew, my tribe, we just want to give you this moment to do what we call a shout out, and you can interpret it in any way you would like to sort of share and connect with the audience, something that you want to leave them with. So Jollene, what's your shout out?
I actually want to address this to any healthcare worker or family of a healthcare worker. What you're experiencing right now is not an accident. I didn't get to point this out earlier, but it's not a coincidence that right-wing fascist heads of state are the places where the death toll is the highest, right? You got Donald Trump, Boris Johnson, you got Duterte in the Philippines. And I'm inviting you to come to our website, submit your story, and I want you to politicize and weaponize that data so that more people don't join that memorial wall. I do also want to acknowledge the labor of the 6 people that put it together. I think similar to Doris, it wouldn't have been done if we didn't love our people and our community. And we hope that for those, I know many of the family members have already checked and contacted, and we hope we gave dignity to the life of your loved ones. So that's it for me.
Doris?
Can I just say ditto to Jollene, man? Yeah. Ditto to what you said, Jollene. And I guess shout out to those who worked on this letter with me. Annalisa, Olivia, Carolyn, Lisa, Eliza, Maitet. You know, we all worked on it together, and yeah. And I'll see you guys in the writing group on Saturday.
Oh.
Do your homework.
Gabbie?
I want to shout out to my titos and titas and my cousins in the Philippines who are watching right now. And also my titos and titas who are in the healthcare field, who day in, day out still choose to go to work, knowing the risk, still choosing to serve. And shout out to Jollene and Doris. Thank you for sharing your hearts, because I think that, to me, it kind of opened up exposed me to more, like to feel more, and I don't want to be numb during this experience. So thank you.
There's, you know, as I was saying, the details in the letter, the details on the website. There's a broad stroke of a letter, a website, the heart that you put into that, that you put into the work you've done. I shout out that all those that are putting heart into their work.
Yeah, I think to me, my shout out this week goes out to all the activists and storytellers. One of the most important pieces to me during this process was the trust that people give you to tell their stories, to represent their stories, and you know, to ask for help. Like we're, you know, the 4 of us are always talking about, like, people got to learn how to ask for help. And at the beginning of all of this, I remember Doris and I sitting there saying, you know, these nurses are so scared. So many of these, not just nurses, but so many healthcare workers are so scared to come forward, because at the time hospitals, and maybe even now, were, you know, firing people. There was so much backlash, et cetera. So, you know, to all the activists and storytellers out there, that's how we know.
And my shout out merges people who are considered and known to be fallen workers in the healthcare industry. But also I'm coming to see how many of our foot soldiers and beloved ones are fallen workers. George Floyd was a fallen worker. And we get to mourn. We collectively are grieving for those people that I want to shout out to them and say, we will not forget your name. We will not forget your name. And may they rest in dignity, and may they rest in power and peace with their ancestors, with our ancestors. Sending much love to you, peace and blessings. And thank you so much, Doris and Jollene. Yes.